Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The unspoken weight of truth. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm maple syrup filled the air as I stood by the stove, flipping the last batch of pancakes. The soft hum of morning birds outside the kitchen window blended seamlessly with the distant rumble of a military jet taking off from the base nearby. It was one of those peaceful mornings, the kind that made me grateful for the quiet moments before the day unraveled into its usual chaos. James sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper like he always did. His Marine Corps uniform, pressed to perfection, bore the weight of over 2 decades of service, and the gleaming medals pinned to his chest told stories of bravery I knew he rarely spoke about. Even after all these years, his presence carried a quiet authority, a steadiness that had become the foundation of our family. "Mom, lots of honey on my pancakes, please." I smiled at the familiar request, just as a blur of energy came bounding down the stairs. My 12-year-old daughter, Lily, skidded into the kitchen, her school uniform slightly askew, her ponytail bouncing with every movement. She had grown up so fast. Too fast. She had always been an independent child, but ever since she started middle school, something had shifted. She had become more aware of herself, more conscious of her appearance. I had noticed how she lingered in front of the mirror, adjusting the length of her skirt, experimenting with new hairstyles. But amidst all the changes, her love for pancakes, drenched in honey, remained a comforting constant. "You're up early today," I said, sliding a plate of golden brown pancakes onto the counter. Lily grinned as she grabbed her fork. "We're starting genetics and science today," she announced excitedly, pulling up a chair beside her father. "It's really interesting." James looked up from his paper, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Oh yeah? What part of genetics are you learning about?" "Well," Lily started, her voice carrying an undercurrent of hesitation, "we're learning about dominant and recessive traits, like how kids inherit their parents' eye color, hair color, even their dimples." She paused, pushing a piece of pancake around on her plate before glancing up at James. "My friend Jenny says I don't look anything like Dad. She says my eyes are a different color and my hair's too dark." The words hung in the air, cutting through the morning stillness. James's hand, which had been flipping a page of the newspaper, stilled. I felt my own breath hitch in my throat. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw James's fingers tighten around the edges of the paper, but his face remained unreadable. Only the steady hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. I forced a chuckle, my voice coming out lighter than I felt. "Oh, honey, that's not true. You have so many things in common with your dad. Your serious nature, the way you organize everything, just like him." Lily didn't say anything. Her eyes, however, flickered toward the family photos sitting atop the china cabinet. A picture of the 3 of us, standing outside the base chapel, James's hand resting proudly on Lily's shoulder. A chill crawled down my spine. She's starting to notice. She's starting to question. And the weight of the truth, long buried, long unspoken, began to press down on my chest. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, I found myself staring at her smartphone, the glow from the screen illuminating the dimly lit hallway outside her bedroom. My fingers hovered over the display as I scrolled through her recent searches. DNA testing, genetic testing, 23andMe. A lump formed in my throat. I had noticed her growing more restless as Father's Day approached, the way she hesitated before answering questions about her resemblance to James, the way she lingered at the mailbox every afternoon, as if expecting something important. It was only a matter of time. I closed the phone with a quiet sigh and turned toward the kitchen. Hidden in the back of a cabinet, behind stacks of old recipe books and forgotten holiday decorations, was an album I had never shown her, a carefully preserved collection of photographs. Memories of a man whose presence still lingered in our lives, even in his absence. James found me standing there, my hand resting on the worn leather cover of the album. He didn't need to ask what I was thinking. "Maybe it's time we tell her," he murmured, his voice softer than usual. "It's too soon," I whispered back. But even as I said it, I knew the words held little conviction. From down the hallway, I could see the sliver of light under Lily's bedroom door. She was awake, and she was waiting for the truth. Saturday arrived with an unusual heaviness. The house smelled of pot roast and roasted potatoes, James's favorite meal. He had spent the afternoon mowing the lawn, and now the sound of running water filled the house as he took a shower. Through the kitchen window, I saw Lily standing by the mailbox. She had been checking it every day. And today was the day it arrived. I stopped chopping vegetables. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her carefully pull the envelope from the stack of mail. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she held it against her chest, clutching it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, she made her way back into the house, disappearing up the stairs. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the sound of the shower turning off. I could hear James's footsteps in the hallway. And then I heard it, a faint, muffled sob from Lily's room. James appeared in the kitchen a moment later, his expression grim. He had heard it too. "It came," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Those two words carried a weight heavier than anything else we had faced before. James exhaled slowly, then nodded. Then we waited. A few minutes passed. Then 5. Then 10. And then the creak of the stairs. One step, then another. Each footstep was heavier than the last. And when Lily finally stepped into the living room, her face was streaked with silent tears, the crumpled envelope trembling in her grasp. She looked at me, then at James. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Dad isn't my real father, is he?" The air around us seemed to freeze. Behind me, I felt James go still. On the walls, the photographs of our family, of our life together, seemed to bear witness to this moment. I swallowed hard, my hands instinctively reaching for the old album. It was time. It was finally time. "Sit down, Lily," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She hesitated, then slowly took a seat beside me. James remained standing, his gaze heavy with unspoken emotion. I placed the album between us, my fingers running over the worn leather cover one last time before flipping it open. The first page revealed a photograph. A young Marine in uniform, his smile bright and full of life. Staff Sergeant Michael Taylor. Lily's biological father, the man who had found eternal rest under a distant Afghan sky. Outside, the sound of a military aircraft roared in the distance, and as the golden evening light filtered through the windows, I took a deep breath. It was time to tell her everything. The truth beneath the surface. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The late afternoon sunlight streamed in through the sheer curtains, casting golden hues across the walls where framed memories hung, a lifetime of moments captured in still images. Lily's small hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled DNA test results. Her face, usually full of youthful energy, was pale, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. James stood by the window, his jaw clenched, arms crossed over his broad chest. His posture was rigid, but I knew him well enough to see through the facade. He was trying to keep his emotions in check, trying to be strong in the way he had always been. For Lily, for me, for the family we had built. Lily's voice, barely above a whisper, shattered the heavy silence. "I don't understand." She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Why? Why did you lie to me?" The words stung, more than I could have ever anticipated. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her eyes searching mine, desperate for an answer. "We never wanted to lie," I said, my voice barely steady. We We wanted to protect you. We wanted you to grow up feeling safe, feeling loved. But it was a lie. Her voice cracked. Everything. Our family. My life. It's all a lie. James exhaled sharply, his gaze flickering between Lily and me, his usual composure beginning to slip. I placed the old leather album on the coffee table between us and slowly turned the first page. The faded photograph stared back at us, a young Marine in crisp uniform, his eyes bright with promise. Staff Sergeant Michael Taylor. Lily's father, my first love. The man whose absence had left a void that could never truly be filled. Lily's breath hitched as she looked at the image. She traced the edges of the photo with trembling fingers, as though she could reach through time and touch the man she had never known. "That's him," I whispered. "That's your father." Her gaze lifted to mine, questions swirling in her tear-filled eyes. "But, James," she hesitated, glancing at the man who had raised her, the only father she had ever known. James finally stepped forward, lowering himself onto the couch beside her. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face before finally speaking. "I am your father," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters." Lily's lips trembled, but she said nothing. I turned another page in the album, revealing more memories. Michael in his training uniform, Michael laughing with his fellow Marines, Michael standing beside me, his arm draped protectively around my shoulders. I took a deep breath before I began. The beginning of a love story. I met Michael when I was just 22 years old. I started, my voice carrying the weight of nostalgia. I had just started working at Naval Station Norfolk as an administrative assistant. It was my first real job, my first taste of independence. A ghost of a smile touched my lips as I recalled the moment. It was a crowded cafeteria. I continued, flipping to another picture, one of me and Michael sitting at a small table, grinning at the camera. I was struggling to find a seat, balancing my tray, when this young Marine walked up and said, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" James finished the sentence for me, his voice softer now. I glanced at him, surprised. He still remembered. He was charming, I admitted, not in an over-the-top way, but in the kind that makes you feel seen, heard. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. Lily stared at the photograph, as though she could see the love in our eyes. He was relentless. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Every day, like clockwork, he'd show up at lunch and sit with me. No matter how rough his training was, no matter how tired he was, he never missed a day. Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you love him?" I met her gaze, my throat tightening. With all my heart. A heavy silence stretched between us. 3 months later, he proposed. I said, flipping to a photograph of Michael down on one knee, holding a small velvet box. The sunset bathed us in golden light, the base memorial park standing behind us. Lily traced the outline of the picture, her eyes distant. "We got married in a small ceremony at the base chapel," I continued. His Marine brothers formed an arch of swords as we walked down the aisle. I turned to another page, our wedding day. Michael in his dress blues, beaming as he held my hands. James was there too, I said, glancing at the man who had been by my side through everything. Lily turned to James, her brows furrowed in confusion. James nodded. "Michael and I were in the same unit," he said. "We trained together. We deployed together. He was my best friend." Lily's lips parted, her eyes darting between the two of us. I hesitated before flipping to the next page. Michael standing in front of our tiny military house, holding up a wooden plank where we had painted our names. Amy and Michael Taylor. Then, I found out I was pregnant. My voice wavered. "With you." Lily's hand flew to her mouth, her breath shaky. "I told Michael the morning before he deployed," I said, my mind drifting back to that memory. "We were making pancakes, just like I did today." He laughed and said it had been too long since he'd had something sweet. Lily's face crumpled. She knew now. She understood what was coming next. The last thing he ever said to me was, "I promise. I'll come back." I inhaled sharply. 2 weeks later, there was a knock on the door. 2 officers stood outside. They removed their caps, and I knew. Lily's body trembled. "We regret to inform you," I whispered, the words that had shattered my world still haunting me. Tears slid down Lily's cheeks as she stared at the image of the man she had never met. The funeral was held at the same chapel we were married in. I said, my voice thick with emotion. James stood beside me the entire time. James reached for something on the bookshelf, a worn-out notebook. He placed it gently in Lily's lap. "This belonged to Michael," he said. "It's his service diary. On the last page, there's a message for you." Lily hesitated before opening it. Her fingers trembled as she flipped to the final entry. It was dated just days before Michael's final mission. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she read the words aloud. "To my unborn child, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. But please know, I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. I wish I could have seen your face, held you in my arms. But even if I can't be there, I will always watch over you. You will never be alone. Your mom, she is the strongest person I know. And James is the kind of man who will protect you like his own. If I can't be there, I want you to know he will be. Lily, my little one, always remember, blood doesn't make a family. Love does. I love you forever. Dad." Lily's sob broke the silence. She clutched the notebook to her chest as fresh tears fell. James placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes glassy. "I made a promise that day," he whispered, "to Michael, to you, to be your father, and I always will be." Lily turned to him, her face streaked with emotion. And then she did something I will never forget. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing. And in that moment, the truth no longer mattered. Because love had already made us a family. The weight of a father's promise. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than silence. The revelation had settled over us like a thick fog, leaving an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Lily sat curled up on the couch, the old leather album resting on her lap, her fingers gently running over the edges of its worn cover. The tear stains on her cheeks had dried, but the weight of everything she had just learned still clung to her like a shadow. James sat across from her, his hands clasped together, staring at the floor like a man deep in thought. I stood by the kitchen counter, watching them both, my heart aching in ways I couldn't quite put into words. For 12 years, we had lived in a carefully constructed reality, a world where love was supposed to be enough to keep the past buried. But the truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how hard we tried to keep it hidden. Lily finally broke the silence. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I swallowed hard, walking toward her, sinking down onto the couch beside her. "I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid that knowing the truth would make you feel different. Afraid that you would question the love that James has given you. Afraid that telling you would change everything." Lily looked down at the album, flipping through the pages with slow, careful hands. "But it has changed everything," she murmured. "I don't even know who I am anymore." James finally lifted his head, his eyes filled with something I had rarely seen. Uncertainty. "Lily," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in it. "You are exactly who you've always been. Nothing about this changes that." She looked up at him, searching his face for something. Reassurance, understanding, maybe even permission to be angry. "You say that," she whispered, "but it does change things, because now I know that you're not my real dad." James flinched slightly, but he didn't look away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together tightly. "Lily, let me tell you something," he said. "Being a father isn't about DNA. It's not about what blood runs through your veins. It's about showing up. It's about holding you when you're sick, cheering for you when you score a goal at your soccer game, staying up all night helping you with your science project. It's about loving you every single day, no matter what. Lily blinked rapidly, her chin trembling. But my real dad, Michael, he would have done those things too, wouldn't he? I closed my eyes for a moment, my heart breaking at the pain in her voice. Yes, I said softly. He would have, if he had been given the chance. James sighed, running a hand over his face before looking Lily directly in the eyes. I made a promise, Lily, he said. A promise to your father. The day he left for deployment, he asked me, if anything ever happened to him, to take care of you and your mom. And I swore that I would. Not because I had to. Not because it was a duty, but because I wanted to. Lily's breathing hitched. James sat back, his voice quieter now. Do you remember when you were 7 and you fell off your bike? He asked. Lily frowned, nodding. Yeah, I broke my wrist. And who took you to the hospital? You did, she whispered. Who stayed up all night by your bed, making sure you weren't in pain? You did. And when you were 9 and you had that terrible fever, James continued, who sat with you in the bathroom, cooling you down with a wet cloth? Who carried you to bed and stayed up the whole night, just in case you needed anything? Lily's lips trembled. You did. James nodded, his voice filled with quiet emotion. And who takes you to school every morning? Who helps you with your math homework? Who tucks you in at night and tells you he loves you? You do, Lily choked out. James reached for her hands, holding them tightly between his own. Nothing about that has changed, he said. I have been your father since the day you were born. I have loved you since before you could even walk, and I will always be your father. No test, no piece of paper, no bloodline can ever change that. Lily let out a soft, shuddering sob, her fingers tightening around his. I wiped at my own tears, watching as my daughter, our daughter, slowly, finally, let the truth sink in. James pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he could shield her from all the uncertainty, all the pain. And for the first time since this all began, I saw it. I saw the moment Lily finally understood. That love, the kind of love that James had given her, unwavering and unconditional, was stronger than DNA. It was the kind of love that made a family. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, James and I sat together in the quiet of the living room. Outside, the world moved on as if nothing had changed. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the distant hum of passing cars filled the night air. But inside our home, everything had changed. James exhaled deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. That was harder than I thought it would be. I nodded, my hands still shaking from everything that had happened. She needed to know, I said. It was time. James was quiet for a long moment before he finally spoke again. I meant every word I said to her, he murmured. She's my daughter, no matter what. I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. I know. He glanced at me, a small, tired smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You think she'll be okay? I looked toward the staircase, where just hours ago, Lily had stood with tears in her eyes, clutching the DNA test like it had the power to rewrite her whole life. But she had come back. She had let James hold her. She had chosen love over blood. Yeah, I whispered. I think she will. James nodded, leaning back against the couch with a heavy sigh. We sat there in the silence, the weight of the day settling into our bones. The truth had been spoken. The past had been uncovered. But in the end, love had won. And that was all that mattered. What it means to belong. The morning after everything changed, I found Lily sitting by the window, staring out at the street with a distant look in her eyes. The golden sunlight danced across her face, highlighting the quiet storm of emotions that still lingered within her. She didn't notice me at first, her fingers lightly tracing the condensation on the windowpane. It wasn't until I placed a warm mug of cocoa in front of her that she turned, blinking as though she had just realized she wasn't alone. "Morning," I said softly. Lily hesitated, then managed a small, tired smile. "Morning." I sat down across from her, studying her expression. She looked different, not in the way that meant she had grown overnight, but in the way that meant something inside her had shifted. "How are you feeling?" I asked. Lily shrugged, staring down at her cocoa. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything just feels different now." I nodded, waiting for her to find the words. "It's weird," she continued after a moment. "For 12 years, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I thought I knew my family, my life, everything. And now, it's like I'm standing in a house I've lived in forever, but all the furniture has been rearranged, and nothing feels quite right anymore." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I reached for her hand, holding it gently between mine. "That makes sense," I said. "Finding out something like this, it shakes things up. It makes you question everything you thought you knew." Lily swallowed, her eyes darting toward the living room, where James was sitting, flipping through a book but not really reading it. "I know what James said," she murmured, "about love making a family, not blood. And I want to believe that. I do." She looked up at me, her voice small. "But then why does it still hurt?" I sighed, rubbing my thumb over her hand. "Because love doesn't erase pain, sweetheart. It just makes it easier to bear." Lily fell silent, turning back to the window. I watched as she tucked her knees to her chest, the same way she used to do when she was little and trying to make sense of something big. I knew she needed more time. And I knew that no matter how much James and I reassured her, this was something she had to process in her own way. But there was one thing I could do. I stood, walking to the bookshelf in the corner of the room, and pulled down an old, slightly worn wooden box. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and covered in scratches from years of being handled. Lily's eyes flickered with curiosity as I set it down in front of her. "What's this?" she asked. I gave her a soft smile. "A piece of your father." She inhaled sharply, glancing at the box as though it might disappear if she blinked too long. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among old photographs and yellowed letters, was Michael's dog tag. Lily hesitated before picking it up, holding it delicately between her fingers as though she was afraid it might break. The metal gleamed in the morning light, the engraving still crisp despite its age. "Michael Taylor," she whispered, running her thumb over the letters. Her father's name. Her real father. The man she had never met, but whose blood ran through her veins. The air in the room shifted. I could feel it, the weight of 1,000 emotions pressing down on her all at once. "He used to wear that every day," I said softly. "Through every deployment, every mission. He never took it off." Lily's fingers curled around the dog tag, gripping it tightly. "Why did you keep it?" I hesitated, because I knew, one day, you'd want to know him. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at the small metal tag. "I do," she whispered. I reached into the box again and pulled out a stack of letters, tied together with an old ribbon. "These are his letters to me, the ones he wrote while he was deployed." Lily took a shaky breath. "Can I read them?" I nodded. "Of course." She hesitated, then slowly untied the ribbon, pulling out the first letter. The paper was slightly wrinkled, the ink faded in places, but Michael's handwriting was still clear. She began to read aloud. "My dearest Amy, if you're reading this, it means I made it through another day, another mission, another moment of wondering what life would be like if I were home with you instead of here. I miss you, more than I can put into words, but I have to believe this is worth it, that all of this means something. And I have to believe that no matter how many miles separate us, No matter how much time passes, our love will always be strong enough to bring me home. Take care of yourself for me. And take care of our little one. I can't wait to meet our baby. With all my love. Michael. Lily's voice wavered as she finished the letter, her hands shaking. I reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. He never got to meet you, I whispered, but he loved you before you were even born. Lily sniffled, wiping her eyes. I wish I could have known him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I know, sweetheart. I know. She looked down at the dog tag again, gripping it tightly. Then, slowly, she slipped the chain over her head, letting it rest against her chest. I watched as something in her shifted. Maybe she would never fully understand why we kept the truth from her. Maybe she would always wonder what life would have been like if Michael had come home. But in that moment, I saw it. The beginning of healing. The beginning of acceptance. The beginning of her finding a way to carry both her fathers in her heart, one who gave her life and one who gave her love. And that, I realized, was what it truly meant to belong. A father's legacy, a daughter's heart. The days after the revelation were different, subtly, but undeniably. Lily carried herself with a quiet introspection, as if she were sifting through all the emotions that had flooded her heart. She still spoke to James, still laughed at his corny jokes, still asked him to check her math homework. But there were moments when I'd catch her touching the dog tag around her neck, her fingers absent-mindedly running over the engraved letters. Michael Taylor. I knew she was trying to understand what it meant. To have two fathers. To have lost one before she ever knew him. To have been loved so deeply by another who had chosen her as his own. One night, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. "Come in," I called, sitting up in bed. Lily stepped inside, clutching Michael's notebook to her chest. Her eyes were puffy, like she had been crying. But there was something else there too, something resolute. "Mom," she whispered, walking toward the bed. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Of course." She hesitated before sitting down beside me, running her hands over the worn cover of the notebook. "Tell me more about him." My breath caught in my throat. Michael. I had spent years keeping my memories of him locked away, afraid that if I shared too much, it would only make things harder for Lily. But now she was ready. I took a deep breath. Michael was stubborn, I said with a small smile. But he was also kind. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world, even in the middle of all the chaos of military life. Lily listened intently, her fingers still gripping the notebook. "He loved sunsets," I continued, closing my eyes for a moment as I let the memory wash over me. Whenever he had a rough day, he'd find a quiet spot to sit and just watch the sun go down. He used to say it reminded him that no matter what happened, there was always a new day coming. Lily swallowed hard. "Do you think he would have been proud of me?" My heart ached at the question. I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart, he is proud of you. I know it. He may not be here, but he has always been watching over you." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she nodded. "I think I want to go see him," she whispered. I stilled. "You mean his grave?" She nodded again. "I want to visit him. I want to talk to him." For a moment, I couldn't speak, but then I reached for her hand and squeezed it tightly. "Okay," I said. "We'll go tomorrow." The next afternoon, we drove to Arlington National Cemetery. James didn't say much during the ride, but he held Lily's hand the entire time. She didn't pull away. When we arrived, the air was crisp, the sky a deep, endless blue. White headstones stretched across the green grass, row after row, each marking a life, a story, a sacrifice. Lily walked in silence, the dog tag still resting against her chest. And then, finally, we reached his grave. Staff Sergeant Michael Taylor, United States Marine Corps. Beloved husband and father. Lily took a deep breath, her fingers grazing the name etched into stone. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, In a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Hi, Dad." I felt James inhale sharply beside me. Lily knelt down, pressing her fingers against the cold stone. "I don't really know what to say," she admitted. "I guess I just wanted to meet you." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I wish you were here. I wish I could have known you." She exhaled shakily. "But I also want to say thank you, because even though I didn't get to have you, you made sure I wasn't alone." She turned, looking at James. "You gave me a father," she whispered. James's face contorted, and he looked away, his throat working as he fought back emotion. Lily turned back to the headstone. "And I think you would have liked him." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A single dog tag. Michael's. She hesitated for a moment, then gently placed it on the stone. "I'll always carry you with me," she said, pressing her palm over his name. "Always." The wind rustled through the trees, the leaves whispering softly, as if the earth itself was bearing witness to this moment. Then Lily stood, wiping her tears. She turned toward James, and before he could react, she threw her arms around him. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. James closed his eyes, holding her tightly. And in that moment, everything became clear. Michael had given her life. James had given her love. And Lily, she had given them both a place in her heart. Blood didn't define a family. Love did, and our family, in all its complexity, was whole. Forever. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.